Hey folks, Corey here with Fist of Stone Wargaming. In today's video, I'm going to show you how I painted up some Death Guard Poxwalkers using primarily contrast paints. I tried to paint these quickly, and this process takes about 12 minutes per model. Not the fastest out there, but far faster than I normally paint. Here are all the paints I use in the video. This selection gave me some variety in picking out details. You can certainly leave out a few if you want to streamline your process. The models I'm using are the easy to build ones from the Blackstone Fortress expansion, No Respite. To start out, I primed the Poxwalkers using a zenithal prime. If you're not sure what that is, it's basically a darker color underneath and then a lighter color from 45 degrees on the top. In this case, I use Xandri Dust on the bottom and Wraithbone on the top. This provides a nice pre-shadow for the contrast paints to go over. Moving to the first color now, we have Guilliman Flesh. As the name implies, I'm going to use this over all of the flesh areas on the model. Just take a look around your model for any exposed skin and paint this on there. Since this is the first color we're putting down, you don't have to be too neat. This is about getting the color on quickly. Just make sure you go in and clean up any large pools that are forming. You don't want to have so much in there that you're going to create tide marks. Next up, I moved on to the pants, or the cloth on the models. In this case, I wanted to have a little bit of variety, so I used a couple of different colors. Since I'm only doing 6 of these, I did 2 of each, but if you're going to do a whole squad and you want to differentiate your 10 or 20 man squads, this might be a good way to do that. Of course, with these colors, you want to start being a little bit more careful where you run up against what you've already painted. For the yellow color, I used Nazdrag yellow, which is kind of a dark brownish yellow. For the orange color, I used Gryph-hound orange. And for the blue color, I used Ultramarines blue. Up next, I used snakebite leather to get any wood detail. On these models, this is really only the weapon handles. Next up, I picked up all the leather details using wildwood. Here you're looking for the belt and any pouches or straps that these guys might have on them. Even though I'm working quickly here, I take my time going around each model to make sure I pick out all of the leather details with wildwood and to make sure that I'm not going over into the colors I've already painted. I'm getting into the darker colors now that will start to cover up the previous colors that I've already laid down. Now moving on to Cygor Brown, which is the third brown color I've used here. But each one has a little bit of a different shade. I'm primarily using this brown for the boots just to give them a darker finish than the other leather details. Again, I'm taking my time and trying not to get the color onto the skin. Moving on now, I'm using Black Templar. This is going to go on all the weapons, and there's a chainmail detail on one of these guys. Basically here, I'm going to use this as the base coat for the weapons. I'm going to assume these weapons are metallic in nature. I'm going to use some metallics here in a later step. But using the black paint will allow me to come over them with a very light touch and save a shading step later on. Basically do an overbrush / dry brush type technique with the metallics rather than painting a full layer on and then shading. Using the Black Templar contrast paint gives me 2 steps in one almost. So while that Black Templar is drying, I'm moving on now to Skeleton Horde. This will be for all the horns and spikes these guys have growing out of their heads or their shoulders. This color can mix a little bit right at the base of the skin. It won't be too noticeable, but try to be a little bit on the neater side. Once that first layer is dry, you're going to want to come back in with a second layer and only work it about halfway up. This will create a darker transition toward the skin and a lighter tip of the bone. You can repeat this step 3 or 4 times to really make the area right against the skin a lot darker if that's your desire. Okay, time to get a little bit now into the Nurgle details. First things first, we're going to use Plaguebearer Flesh to go over the entire skin of the miniature. So everything we painted Guilliman Flesh in the very first step, I'm going to go over with a layer of this Plaguebearer Flesh contrast paint. It's a relatively low pigment paint, and I'm trying to keep it a little bit on the thin side, but I am coming right out of the pot. No extra thinning this out or anything, just washing it over all of the skin. This will give us a nice greenish tint and start to bring in that Papa Nurgle feel. While the skin was drying again, keep things moving, I moved on to the metallics now. Just using some GW Lead Belcher to pick out the metallic details. On this guy, there's a couple of rings on the end of the straps that I'm picking out, and I'm also going to add some metallic color to his weapons. Primarily here, just using an edge highlight, but then dragging the brush real gently across the flat surfaces to create a broken overbrush type look. This technique lets you know that it's a metal weapon, but it's not a clean, gleaming, well-kept sword, for example. It's got some dirt and grime on it. Similarly here on this particular model with the chainmail, very lightly going over the rings for the chain and just catching the very tips of it. So to approach this guy's open stomach, I wanted to give a little bit of a sore look. So I grabbed some Volupus pink contrast paint and started applying it, and I thought right out of the pot here it looked a little bit too thick. So I went and cleaned my brush off real quick, but left it wet, came right back to the miniature and started spreading that Volupus pink out. That toned the color down quite a bit, but still gave me the sore, painful look that I was looking for. Do the same kind of thing on the back with some of these sores. You can work through your models and do this as much or as little as you'd like. So with this particular guy and his mutation, I wanted to have a nice transition from the fleshy tone to the pinkish tone at the end. In order to get that effect, I started out with Volupus pink at the very end, or the very tip of this particular mutation. Clean the brush off and then grab some Maggots purple. The purple color is a lot less pigmented than the red and will help start to blend that transition down. Once I have some purple on the miniature, I clean the brush off and begin blending the purple up into the skin and then down into the red. While that's drying a little bit, I use the Maggots purple to pick out some sore areas around some of these pustules on the rest of the miniature. And then I go back and add some Volupus pink right at the very tip to strengthen up that pinkish red color. Now I'm going to go in and pick out a few details with Wraithbone in preparation of adding some contrast paint back over these. So here I'm picking out the maggots, the eyes, and the teeth of the miniatures. Don't have to be super perfect with this because we're going to add some more contrast paint which will blend it all back in together. But a few minutes here on some of these extra details really helps them pop and gives a little bit of extra character to the models. So now for these maggots and for the eyes, I'm going in with Warp Lightning contrast paint. This is kind of a different tone to everything else on the model. This is going to really stand out because the green is really vibrant compared to the colors that we've put on so far. I also use this color on like the snot coming out of the one guy's face mask. Once the Warp Lightning was dry, time to bring everything together with a dry brush. Here I'm just using Underhive Ash dry paint. It's got a little bit of a green tint over everything on the miniature. This will not only highlight the miniature, but it will help tie all of the colors together in the final step. As you can see here, be careful with some of the details because I just knocked one of them right off. You can see here how it even works over the blue of this guy's pants, making them almost look like faded, worn out jeans. With the dry brushing complete, I based the models in my typical Blackstone Fortress style. You can find a link to that video in the top right of the screen now. If you got something useful out of this video, please give it a like down below. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you in the next video.